right, Ian Lee joins me now, Associate Professor, Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. Ian, it's good to see you again.
My pleasure, Angie.
Tell me where the wheels are turning on this in your mind here with regards to this announcement coming from Donald Trump.
Well, beyond the fact that it looks like the Immigration Minister of Canada, Mark Miller, is now going to be reporting to President-elect Trump, setting that aside, the consequences are going to be devastating for Canada. The U.S. is our largest trading partner. Roughly 70% of the totality of our trade is with the United States. 2/3 of our GDP is dependent on trade. I looked up the chief economist of Global Affairs Canada and StatsCan data, and they say that it estimates that just under 2 million jobs in Canada are dependent on exports to the United States. That's direct and indirect jobs. I mean, this is catastrophic. I mean, let's be very clear. There's no way of sugarcoating this. This is just completely bad news. There's no redeeming good news here for Canada.
And we're certainly getting a lot of reaction coming from many people. We've heard from Jagmeet Singh, the Quebec Premier François Legault, putting this out on X, saying this promise by President-elect Donald Trump poses an enormous risk to the Quebec and Canadian economies. We must do everything possible, to avoid 25% tariffs on all products exported to the United States. Border integrity must be the priority of the federal government. Offer the full cooperation of the Quebec government to Prime Minister Trudeau. The border, as you know, Ian, we've heard that from Donald Trump, and we've heard that from other analysts as well. That is really key in all of this. But talk to us about that border from a business perspective as well. How critical, obviously, of course, it is. And with this now hanging over us, and again, we don't know what's going to happen, but it certainly is a shock, as you point out here. With this hanging over us, what will this mean as we're sort of looking on that export of goods and services back and forth?
Well, I'll just deal with that in 1 minute, but let me just go big picture for a moment. I mean, this is an absolute repudiation of CUSMA, of the NAFTA agreement, which we now call CUSMA. I mean, if anything, I would think that this is going to accelerate and bring forward those negotiations from 2026 to the moment Donald Trump enters office, because in January 20th, I believe, because, as I said, this is an abrogation. This is because this is prohibited under CUSMA. The second point that's going to have on us is, I would suspect that overnight and tomorrow morning we're going to see the Canadian dollar tank go down, depreciate, and that, of course, again, because we import so much and export so much, it will. If the Canadian dollar goes down significantly, that's going to drive up the cost of imported goods, and we import a lot of fruit and vegetables, of course, in the winter months. So that'll put pressure on the cost of living. But in terms of the border, this couldn't come at a worse time, because we've had all these strikes in Canada, Port of Vancouver, Port of Montreal, the CN Rail, CP, and we were already, shall we say, a not very reliable partner. And then along comes this, which could almost close the border in terms of the movement of goods and services. And there's a staggering amount of goods that cross those borders, those bridges, every day, upwards of $2 billion a day. So again, the impact on the Canadian economy, on jobs, on the Canadian currency, of course, on Ottawa and the premiers, is going to be just incalculable, beyond just the sheer negative economic impact this is going to have on our economy. Remember, we're only 1/10 the size of the U.S. We're $2.5 trillion. They're $25 trillion.
You talked about the cost of living. You mentioned that briefly, Ian, but let's pull away the layers on that as well, because the concern is any additional tax, whether we're talking about 25% or anything, will eventually spill over onto the consumer.
Oh, for sure, because I think the immediate impact will be through the dollar. That is to say, the markets are going to say, look, this is really bad for Canada. They're going to drive down the value of the Canadian dollar vis-a-vis the US dollar, which will increase the cost of our imports. We import about 1/3 of GDP. That's about $1 trillion. That's clearly going to push prices up. But it's also, if these tariffs did go through, it's going to cause unemployment in Canada, because those companies that are exporting, those many jobs in those companies that are exporting to the United States will be laying people off, because they'll be losing their export markets almost overnight. And so, I mean, when you lose a market of that magnitude, and you're an exporter in Southern Ontario, for example, in the auto industry with auto parts, this is going to almost put you out of business. And so again, this isn't theory. This is really catastrophic, which is why I think that we're going to need all hands on deck, the Premier, the Prime Minister, and possibly offering to renegotiate CUSMA now, move that timetable up. Of course, we want you to reverse this, but we're going to have to offer something more than, oh my goodness, this is going to hurt Canadians a lot. I mean, Trump already understands that. That's why he's threatening us with this.
What do you think the Bank of Canada is watching right now, could potentially respond to, as we constantly sort of look for that response, that guidance here? But from that perspective here, what do you think?
They may issue soothing words, but for those who are saying, well, this is clearly time for a bigger rate cut, well, all that's going to do is accelerate the depreciation of the Canadian dollar, because there's already a gap between the central bank rate, interest rate in the States and in Canada. That's been partially contributing to the depreciation of the Canadian dollar. If they were to say, you know, oh, well, this is a real crisis, we're going to drive down interest rates by another half a point, that will make the decline of the dollar even worse. And that will cause imported goods to cost even more, which will push up inflation even more. So I cannot imagine that the central bank would be saying, gee whiz, let's go and cut interest rates by a half a point or more in light of this. It would just be, so again, it would be counterproductive to the Canadian economy. I think the solution is more going to be political rather than, for example, central bank intervention.
Before I let you go, Ian, last question to you here. What are you watching for now?
The Canadian government is clearly going to respond. The 10 premiers are clearly going to respond. They'll probably put together some emergency task force. The question is, what is Trump demanding concretely? What is he demanding of us that we can potentially offer to have him rescind this commitment for the staggering increase in the tariffs? He said it in very general terms. I mean, illegal immigration and illegal drugs, that's a very generic generalization. I mean, what specifically, concretely, does he want Canada to promise or commit to for him to cancel his promise to raise tariffs? So that's what I'll be watching for tomorrow morning.
Ian, good to have you on this. Thank you so much. Ian Lee, an associate professor, Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. Thanks again, Ian.